qualified with a 5.5 years master's degree as a Danish state-authorized translator and interpreter back in 1990. And I actually moved to the UK right away after graduating to start working as a contract freelancer for a Nordic translation agency. And I did that for about 5 years, setting up the business as such when I went truly self-employed. That was in May 1995, and I called it Sandberg Translation Partners. That's when I started hiring my first few in-house translators, initially only Danes, and then a few years later, Swedes, etc. I became a member of several associations for translators and translation agencies, and demand for our services grew steadily as more and more LSPs found us in the membership directories of those various associations. So by 2000, we were 8 people in the office. And as the owner, I obviously wore many different hats. But at that time, I still spent most of my time translating, revising, and mentoring other translators. And then fast forward to 2002, I acquired a portion of another LSP that was closing down, which is when our now CEO, Arno Carnegie-Brown, joined the business. We saw steady growth throughout the 2000s, and a decade later, in 2012, we made 2 further acquisitions that were companies with a very similar business model to ours, which took us to around 50 full-time employees. This was also around the time when I decided to get out of the office a bit more, and I started attending conferences organized by various LSP associations, and not least Gala's own annual conference. And for the last 10 years or so, we've been consolidating our market position and have achieved a fairly high degree of organizational maturity, I think. And I have, in the last 3 or 4 years, gradually been reducing my own working hours and thinking more about leadership succession and my eventual retirement. The employee ownership trust framework is something that came to our attention in back in 2018, I think it was. It is an indirect form of employee ownership, whereby a trust acquires all or most of the shares. It has to be a majority of at least 51%. And it holds those shares for the benefit of the employees. In the UK, the scheme is promoted and incentivized by the government in the form of favorable taxation, both for the exiting shareholders and for the employees. The main financial benefit for the employees is that they get a stake in the business without having to invest at all. They enjoy the benefits of indirect ownership while they remain employees of the company. But if they leave the company, they also leave behind the benefits. So to be clear, the employees do not have to buy shares when they join the company or sell shares when leaving. And that, of course, makes it a lot simpler. Now, then the previous owners, the exiting shareholders, of course, have to be paid for their shares. And that is done out of future years' profits from the trading company. But once the owners have been fully paid, then all or most of the annual profits can be distributed to all employees in the form of annual bonuses. And in the UK, this is where the financial benefit to the employees comes in, because the employee bonuses are free of income tax up to a point. Another significant, if you like, non-financial aspect of an employee ownership trust is that it allows for the employees to have direct representation. There can be trustee directors on the board. And in our case, we're starting with 2 employee trustee directors who join me and Arno on the board of trustees. And in this way, we ensure that the company's employees have a say in the destiny of the company and have the opportunity to hold the board of directors and the management team of the trading company accountable for the way they run the business. As you said, it seems not to be a particularly well-known form of company ownership, at least not in our sector. We have learned from our advisors through this process that it is actually fairly common and widespread in the UK, and there are associations that represent or look after the interests of the employee-owned companies and help owners, managers, and employee representatives to learn how to get the most out of these companies. So it is growing and does seem to be popular in the UK. We've heard from industry peers from other countries that similar schemes do exist elsewhere, including in the Netherlands and the USA, we've heard, but probably are less well known there. And of course, they will have their own rules and regulations around this type of corporate structure. As I mentioned, we became aware of this scheme. It was at an ATC conference in London in 2018, but there was a keynote speaker who mentioned it among other more well-known forms of shareholder exits. And actually, as I said, I mentioned earlier also, we have learned that employee ownership companies have existed in the UK for many years. But in 2014, the government decided to try and get more small to medium companies to go this way and started offering financial incentives. Now, while I have certainly not been in any rush to exit the business because I still enjoy the stimulation I get from being a part of our exciting industry. However, as I get older, I've had to think about what succession options would be available to us considering our business model. Because we've always focused on working for other LSPs, and we've seen ourselves as a translation production company, focusing on only 5 languages. And all of this has meant that few potential buyers would want to or even be able to keep the company running as it is. So although we've actually had several offers and plenty of interest, both from LSPs and private equity over the years, we have also considered this EOT option over the last 5 years, and we're ultimately drawn to this solution because of the control it gives us. It enables us to secure a future where we retain independence and control over what happens to us. Independence in terms of the decisions, such as who do we work for and what kind of people do we employ, how much profit do we have to make, we target year-on-year growth, etc. And as a company, I don't think we would have retained much control over these matters if we had sold to another language service provider or a private equity fund. So you might argue that it could be seen as a path of least resistance to a gradual transition. And that is certainly true. It gives us a sense of peace of mind and no need to worry about the stresses of what requirements and control may be imposed by a new owner. And we also feel that is in the interest of our employees, not only for mine and Anu's sake, as we embark on this gradual succession planning. We actually embarked on the process 3 years ago, but called a halt to it after a couple of months because we realized that the timing wasn't right for us for a couple of reasons, including financial considerations and leadership succession in particular, we were thinking a lot about. But our financials stabilized. We've had to contend with Brexit and obviously, like everyone else, the fallout from the COVID pandemic in the last 2 or 3 years. But our finances stabilized in 21 and 22. Actually, 21 wasn't a great year, but 22 was a very good year. So we knew that the valuation, which is an independent open market valuation of the company, that would take into account the last 3 years' financials. So that was part of the reason why we thought the time was right now. That's a good question because we became aware after a few days of publicity around it that we didn't seem to have communicated that well enough. In actual fact, and to us this is part of the attraction, nothing changes, really absolutely nothing changes for us, in our day-to-day lives and roles. The company continues exactly as if there had been no change in formal ownership. Anu continues as managing director and I continue as executive chairman, and everyone else continues in their job the way they know it already. If I start with our staff, it's generally been well received. Some people have been more vocal or expressive in asking questions and expressing either reservations or appreciation of it. But on the whole, it's been very well received, as we would have expected. Communication and expectation management is important. Of course, we have made a significant effort to try and really inform our staff about the bigger thinking about it and the details about how this will all play out over a period of several years. And as I say, managing expectations about how quickly profits will start to be shared with our employees. From the general industry at large, we have had a lot of interest. People appreciate it from a sense of community. They see it as an interesting contrast to a purely financially motivated sale to a bigger LSP or a private equity investor, which of course are the common forms of share transactions, when transaction companies change ownership. And a lot of the owners of small to medium companies, of whom Anu and I know many around the world, have actually reached out to us. Just an hour ago, I had a half-hour meeting with a CEO in the UK of a company, a little smaller than us perhaps, but they're very interested. So if we can spread the word so that people become aware of this opportunity and they can take their time to investigate whether it's the right thing for them, then we're certainly very happy to help. Obviously, any owner considering something like this should spend some time, and it doesn't really have to be a long time. You start by reading the official guidance from the government, because the scheme is a government regulated one. And then you can read advice from professional consultants, so accounting firms and law firms that will advise on the financial and the legal implications involved in the transition. What I told the person I spoke to separately about an hour ago was that, considering what I know of M&A, when I have spoken with other industry colleagues who have been involved in either buying or selling translation companies and going through integrations, etc., it's clear to me that this is, by a long way, it is a far, far easier transition to go through on every level, both the speed with which it can be done from a legal and financial transaction perspective, and the amount of thinking and effort that goes into the preparation. And if you look at it beyond the share sale, beyond the transaction date, there is no integration, there is no further effort. You just carry on running the company to the best of your ability, trying to ensure that the company remains relevant in its market space, remains competitive, remains profitable, and that's it. It really is business as usual. So I would consider it by far the easiest form of exit for owners of, when I say small to medium, I suppose in principle it could happen to any size of company in our sector and in many other sectors.